questions at the end. Moving from kind of the high-dimensional spatial data space to high-dimensional semantic space, Nadine Housri, who's not only a really gifted physician scientist, but also runs theMednet, which I think is one of the best kind of informal educational opportunities we have in the field, is going to be speaking to us about natural language processing and improving clinical trial enrollment through the Oncologist Network.
Thank you very much, Dave, and Anshu for inviting me to speak today. So I am the Chief Medical Officer and founder of theMednet and an Assistant Professor of Radiation Oncology at Yale. I'm going to speak about improving clinical trial enrollment through an online oncologist network, and specifically focus on theMednet, which is a social question and answer platform of over 3,500 clinical questions not found in the literature, textbooks, or guidelines. Our community is made up of over 9,000 radiation, medical, and gynecologic oncologists since 2014, and it's a very active and very engaged community. We have monthly active users about 45 to 50%. So the premise of theMednet is very, very simple. You come on as a clinician and you search for the answer to the question that you have. If you don't find the answer, you can ask it, and then we reach out to experts and get an answer to your question and share it with the rest of the community in a feed very similar to Twitter or Facebook. So our community of over 9,000 oncologists includes over 90% of U.S. radiation oncologists, over 35% of U.S. medical oncologists, and over 30% of gynecologic oncologists. 500 plus academic oncologists from every major cancer center have answered questions on theMednet. The content has a very long shelf life. So there's over 3,500 questions and the answers have been viewed over 1 million times. 83% are viewed every month, which means people are coming back and viewing Q&A that might have been a month, 2 months, a year, 2 years old. So it has long-lasting value. When we envisioned theMednet, we really thought that experts would come on and they would answer questions using their clinical expertise, because the questions really are based on things that are in the data-free zone. And that is what we found. 70% of the answers are citing clinical experience. Honestly, we were surprised to find that almost 60% also cite published data. And there's this really nice overlap of answers that are citing both published data and clinical experience. So this is what we know, and this is what I do. The most frequent data source is phase 3 randomized trials, followed by retrospective studies. An interesting thing that we also found is that 20% of the answers cite clinical trials, current trials, future trials. We saw this trend very early on, and we started thinking about how theMednet can help drive clinical trials forward. So why do we care even about clinical trials? Cancer clinical trials are incredibly important. They translate our scientific discoveries into standard cancer care. And as we have more trials that are involving targeted therapy and personalized medicine, we're stratifying more patients based on molecular markers. And therefore, we need more and more patients than ever before. It sounds really exciting, but it's very problematic, because we know that only 2 to 5% of cancer patients enroll on cancer clinical trials. 70% of trials are delayed, and 25% never reach their enrollment goals. And most patients are unaware of clinical trials that they may be eligible for. So the problem is that important clinical questions that could change standards of care for thousands of patients just go unanswered by clinical trials. So theMednet wants to change this. We want to change how physicians learn about clinical trials. And why are we focused on the physician piece? Why do we think that's so important? Well, physicians are the most trusted source of information about trials to patients. And if you look at all of the factors that determine why a patient goes on a clinical trial, the oncologist's awareness of the trial, the knowledge of the patient's eligibility, and the ease of discussing the trial really all bear the strongest relationship with accrual. So last year, we worked with SWOG, and we did a pilot study. It was a targeted social and personalized campaign on theMednet to raise awareness and education with the endpoint of hopefully increasing accrual to clinical trials, and it was funded by the Hope Foundation. So the objective was to evaluate how feasible was this, a targeted social and personalized campaign to raise oncologists' awareness to 2 SWOG clinical trials on theMednet. Our endpoints were engagement. So we looked at registration rate and monthly use. would SWOG members sign up for the MedNet, and then would they actually use it, and would they engage with clinical trial content? We also looked at some descriptive endpoints. We wanted to know what was the most engaging content that we could use in a future study. So the first step was to invite SWOG members onto the MedNet via NCORP PI. So the NCORP, we really focused on community oncologists. We selected 10 NCORPs, and our goal was to register 20%. And we actually registered 49%. So we met our registration goal by 150%. We then did a pre-pilot survey on knowledge of two SWOG clinical trials, S1418 and S1501. So we asked these clinicians if they were aware of a trial looking at adjuvant immunotherapy in triple-negative breast cancer with an incomplete response to neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and 53% said they were aware. So, and 47% did not know. So 47% of these individuals we surveyed didn't know about a trial that was open at their own institution. This is actually a very large phase 3 trial all over the country. The other study, S1501, we asked if they were aware of any studies looking at preventing cardiac toxicity from trastuzumab in metastatic HER2-positive breast cancer patients. This was even worse. 32% were aware of the study, and 68% did not know of this trial that was also going on at their institutions. We then delivered personalized and targeted messaging over 6 months. This included trial-relevant Q&A, clinical trial alerts, email notifications from the PI, and then leaderboards of top enrolling physicians. So this is what the clinically relevant Q&A is. We actually worked with the PI to put together a question and answer, very clinically focused question, and the answer basically cited the clinical trial. We would see these in our weekly newsletters. We also created a leaderboard so that individuals could see how well they were enrolling compared to other physicians locally and nationally. And they could also see how well their institution was enrolling, again, locally and nationally. And this was an example of an email notification that you would get. You would say, you've enrolled this many patients, and this is how you rank nationally, and this is how your peers are doing. And then we created personalized messaging from the PI. So kind of a personal appeal to try to enroll more patients in the trial. Dear Dr. So-and-so, I want to tell you about this trial very briefly. You can see our enrollment data here. Why is it important? Feel free to call me if you have any questions. We then did a post-pilot survey on the knowledge of these two trials. And you can see that for both trials, awareness did increase over time for S1418 and S1501. So we can't take all of the credit. Knowledge does tend to increase over time, but let's take some credit. So we reached both of our endpoints, exceeded the registration rate, monthly active was also met, and usage actually increased over time. In terms of that messaging that we had created, we found that the personalized outreach from the PI was the most popular type of notification. The SWOG investigators said they actually wanted to receive more of those types of messages. The real-life clinical questions and answers citing the trials had very strong engagement with the individuals within those 10 NCORPs, but also more broadly nationally. The leaderboards also generated strong interest, and I think there's a real potential to create a sense of community around clinical trial enrollment. And then SWOG members did report learning about trials they did not know about. So the members who reported learning about the trials were twice as active on the MedNet as those who did not report learning about them. So our work led to a National Science Foundation grant, and we were also named a company changing the future of medicine by Inc. magazine, which was very exciting. To go a little bit into detail about the NSF-funded study. So this is where the machine learning actually comes into play. And Sanjay Anejo, you heard from before, is our collaborator on this. The goal is to use machine learning to start suggesting clinical trials to the MedNet members based on their clinical questions. So the rationale is that clinical trials are the most relevant at the time that individuals are seeking out information about how to treat their patients. So if you suggest clinical trials at the point of care, it actually brings them top of mind for clinicians and may improve the likelihood of referral to a trial. Phase 1 of the studies focused on matching clinicians' breast cancer questions specifically to NCI breast cancer trials. So in terms of the methodology, Sanjay can go into a lot more detail about this, but the first part was actually breast cancer question identification. How well could we use machine learning methods to identify questions as breast cancer questions? And the second aspect involved cancer trial matching. And we had to create a data set for this. We actually created a ranked set of breast cancer trial features, and then abstracted NCI clinical trials based on the features, and did the same with a set of breast cancer questions on the MedNet. The results is that the ML approaches achieved an accuracy of 95.5% at identifying breast cancer questions, and it was best achieved by older machine learning methodologies as opposed to deep learning. And with the questions, we were able to match 72.2% to the clinical trials, and this was also most accurate when using frequency analysis of clinical features. And this is mostly driven by 4 features: neoadjuvant chemotherapy, stage 4, and triple negative and HER2 positive status. Again, less accurate when we used deep learning techniques, most likely because of the amount of data that would have been necessary. So what's next? So we're going to be working on refining the technology to start suggesting clinical trials for questions across disease sites, not just breast cancer. What we really want to do at the end of the day is start combining machine learning and social engagement tools like the ones I had mentioned in the pilot study to start raising awareness to clinical trials across NCTN. And the rationale is what we believe is that the social engagement interventions and machine learning may actually be very synergistic, so a combination of technology and social. We want to start looking at how often real-world clinical questions can accurately match the clinical trials, and does this improve over time? Does the system learn over time and get better? And how does this impact clinicians? How often are they referring their patients to trials? This is an example of what it will look like. So here's a question on the MedNet. Is there ever a role for adjuvant chemotherapy or immunotherapy for early stage N0 non-small cell lung cancer treated with SBRT alone? So one of our experts answers, no, only in the setting of a clinical trial. Well, look, here's a trial that actually matched to this question. You can go and see which sites near you, because you're logged in. If you enter your institution information, we can see which sites nearby have the trial open. You can see a full description, contact the PI, hopefully have a leaderboard. You can see where people are enrolling to this trial and how well. And that's it. I'm happy to take any questions, I think, soon.